Hi there. Good afternoon. My name is Joanna Nelson, and I'm with the New Mexico Economic Development Department. And today you have joined us for a webinar that's a part of an ongoing series where we host informational sessions about financing programs, and especially in light of the COVID-19 health crisis, we want to focus on financial opportunities for small businesses. So today we are focusing on the update on the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant program through the SBA. So thanks so much for tuning in. And I wanted to go over a few logistics before we get started. We will be recording this session. I'm checking right now. We are recording this. So we will upload this presentation to our YouTube channel. So if you have to jump off, no worries. You can watch this when you're free. And then we also will send out the presentation to you after we conclude as well. We did get your questions that you submitted when you registered, so we're going to do our best to address those. And then as we go along, feel free to submit questions in the questions box that you'll see on the right side of your screen. And as I said, if we don't get to all of them, we will try to follow up afterward. I did want to give a little bit of background on the Economic Development Department before we begin as well. Our Cabinet Secretary is Alicia J. Keys, and our Deputy Cabinet Secretary is John Clark. And as you can see, we have several different divisions within our department, including film, outdoor rec, and Main Street. A lot of those folks are directly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic and have live music venues or performance venues. So this is an applicable program, hopefully. I did want to highlight the collateral assistance program, make sure everyone knows about this program. This is a program that we are able to assist businesses that are wanting to get a commercial loan, and we are able to help with shortfalls in collateral. So right now this is coming into play because lenders are hesitant to lend. They want to limit their risk in an uncertain market. And so we're able to put up a CD, a certificate of deposit, to act as additional collateral for that project. We do have a focus on underserved markets, which includes women, veteran, rural areas, and tribal projects. So if this project, or I mean, if this program sounds like a fit for your project, please reach out to us, and we'll do our best to work with you, and hopefully we could utilize this program. And I do have to give a shout out to the SBDC, who is participating on this panel, because they are partners with us on this program as well and help us review the projects. Here's a quick snapshot of some other financial programs that we have in the department. I'm not going to go into all of these, but when you have the presentation, these are all live links, and you can follow up on these, and hopefully some of them might fit. We have regional reps throughout the state that represent our department. You can see these located in various regions of the state. If you don't know your regional rep, you can go to this link, find their contact, reach out to them, and they are a fantastic resource about anything and everything in your region regarding business projects, community development projects, and a really good entrance into our department. So you can ask them anything, and they'll get right back to you. One of the ways that we are engaging in recovery efforts with the COVID-19 is getting information out to businesses and communities. So one of the ways that we're doing that are through these webinars. This one is an example. You can see some upcoming webinars that we have. Tomorrow we're focusing on international trade resources. And then this actually is not our webinar, but I wanted to highlight this. SBA is a great partner of ours, and they are hosting a session on the 28th to go over the PPP relaunch. So if you have a chance, you should check that out. But you can go to our YouTube channel. You can see all of our previous webinars where we focus on financial opportunities and programs. related to COVID-19 relief and not. So you also can stay up to date with news and financial opportunities by signing up for our newsletter. We started this in April as a response to COVID because we want to get information out about these various grant programs and loan programs, as well as news, events, and relevant webinars. So if you don't get that, you can sign up. And then of course, here's our website. So great way to stay up to date with business opportunities. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. And I want to go ahead and introduce a great partner of ours that is coming to us from the Department of Cultural Affairs. This is Michelle Laflamme Childs, and she is the Executive Director of New Mexico Arts. Michelle, you want to take it away?
Yes, thank you, Joanna. Welcome, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today, especially during the lunch hour. Our panelists know pretty much everything there is to know about the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant Program at this point, and I have no doubt that it'll be helpful to you as you begin the process of navigating the application. And when the guidelines are released, we are planning to do another webinar to share that info with you as well. So know this is a pre-guidelines webinar. As Joanna said, I'm the Executive Director of New Mexico Arts, which is your state arts agency and a division of the New Mexico Department of Cultural Affairs. Every state in the United States and some of the provinces and whatnot also have state arts agencies, which were all created after the founding of the National Endowment for the Arts in 1965 to serve as channels for federal state arts funding. As a result, our primary function is to provide financial support for art services and programs to nonprofit organizations through our grants program statewide, and we also manage the 1% for Public Art program for the state of New Mexico. In addition, we actually administer a whole bunch of other programs, including Arts in the Military, a Folk Art Apprentice Master Program, the Governor's Awards for Excellence in the Arts, the State Poet Laureate Program, the New Mexico Arts and Cultural Districts, on which we actually partner with Economic Development's Main Street Program, the Poetry Out Loud National Recitation Competition, and others. And we also house the New Mexico Music Commission, which is a 15-member governor-appointed body with the mission to protect and promote and preserve the musical traditions of our state. And our advisory body at New Mexico Arts is the governor-appointed New Mexico Arts Commission. Briefly, just so you know what DCA is, the Department of Cultural Affairs represents New Mexico's dedication to preserving and celebrating the cultural integrity and diversity of our state. Our cabinet secretary is Deborah Garcia E. Griego, and our deputy secretary is Nick Schiavo. We have some 500 employees spread throughout 15 divisions, one of which is New Mexico Arts, with another 1,000 or so volunteers putting in more than 70,000 hours annually. DCA oversees a broad range of New Mexico's arts and cultural heritage agencies, representing a huge variety of programs and services, including, you might not know, the management of the largest state-sponsored museum system in the United States, with museums and historic sites located across the state. And also under our very big DCA umbrella are diverse programs and divisions like the New Mexico State Library, the Historic Preservation Division, and the State Office of Archaeological Studies. So DCA does a whole bunch of stuff. And now for the reason you're all actually here, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who is Russell Wyrick. He's the State Director of the New Mexico Small Business Development Network. Russell comes from an entrepreneurial background himself and has a long history with the SBDC program. In fact, his first connection was as a client. Following high school, the SBDC worked with him and provided assistance in starting his first business. And then after many years of successful entrepreneurship, Russell has returned to the same SBD center that assisted him and began serving as part-time business advisor all the way to today as he's executive director. And he'll probably tell you a little more about the New Mexico Small Business Development Center, so I'll leave that to Russell. Welcome, Russell Wyrick.
Thank you. So glad to be here. Let me see if I can share my screen. All right, let's see. Can you see my big America's SBDC New Mexico logo on the screen?
Yes, sir.
It worked very good. So grateful to be here. My name's Russell Wyrick. I'm the Executive State Director for the New Mexico Small Business Development Center Network, which includes several programs across the state. We'll talk about that. And so again, I've got multiple slides here. I think this will clarify a lot of things from what's known to date on this program. So again, this is the presentation of the New Mexico Economic Development Department and Department of Cultural Affairs have come together to make sure you have the information you need on this. So let's start with an overview, talk a little bit about this. The Shuttered Venue Operators Grant, the SVOG, on page 2,124. Now, the Consolidated Appropriations Act was huge. It was like 5,500 pages, okay? And on page 2,124, I'm mentioning this because I'll explain here in a second. It's a great opportunity. You can go look it up and read through the details of this yourself because it's really what we're going through. And it's section 324, grants for shuttered venue operators. And it was established by Economic Aid to Hard-Hit Small Businesses, Nonprofits, and Venue Acts. It's signed into law on December 27, 2020. And that program included $15 billion in grants for shuttered venues to be administered by the SBA's Office of Disaster Assistance. So that's who's going to be managing the grant. The stimulus funds are to support specific live venue operators or promoters, theatrical producers, live performing arts organizations, operators, relevant museum operators. I'm going to give you the definition of that. We had to do some pretty dig through some research to get you that. I'll get you that information. Motion picture theater operators, talent representatives impacted by COVID-19 pandemic. And this section is commonly referred to as the Save Our Stages Act or the SOS, which you may hear that term. And basically, no, they're one and the same. So kind of what happens with legislation, there was probably someone working on the Save Our Stages Act. And when they did the Consolidation Appropriation Act, they pushed it into it. So it basically was consolidated, a bunch of acts pulled together, if that makes sense. So if you hear someone refer to Save Our Stages Act or the grants for shuttered venue operators, it's the same thing, okay? So the SBA, right now, this is important, they're in the process of setting up the grant program and it's not yet accepting applications. So you can't go apply for this now. Some of you are gonna say, when can we apply? And our answer is gonna be, we don't know. I mean, it could be late March, it could be, we have no idea at this stage. They're not accepting applications and we don't have release of that information. But those who have suffered the greatest economic loss are going to be the first applications processed according to a schedule that I'm going to cover here later in the presentation. And this is kind of caveat, I want everyone to understand what I'm saying here. This presentation, we are limited to the information that my team has gathered directly from the Consolidated Appropriation Act 2021. And that is subject to the rules being provided for by the SBA, which have not been released as of yet. So the SBA still has to release the rules, their interpretation of things, how they're going to do it, what the application is going. No one's seen an application form. No one's. All these things have to be developed and released. And the other thing is the SBA can interpret parts of the SVO differently. Okay, so when they read through the act, the SBA, that department the administrator may interpret that act a little bit differently than how one might interpret reading it. And so it could impact multiple aspects of the grant. So just be prepared. What we are going to cover today is what is written in the act. And I want to thank my team, Adrian Gallegos and Glenn Walters. Both of them have really dedicated in helping me get this presentation together, as well as the research of digging through the act and identifying all of the caveats in there. The other thing I want to say as I'm getting started here, I want to make sure I cover. You may have come strictly for this, but there's a lot of other things in that act. So I looked through some of the questions, and I know there's individuals like, I'm starting a new performance venue, do I qualify for things, etc. I don't want you to take, as we get to that portion of this discussion, oh, well, this, there's nothing for me. There's a lot of stuff in that Consolidated Appropriations Act. So if you're a new performance venue, right, you're not going to qualify for this, but you want to look at an SBA loan because, again, there's some really cool things they're doing, like covering the first 6 months of payments and interest for you if you get a new SBA loan. So that's why I'm saying, lots of research to do, Economic Development Department, a lot of presentations coming up. So just keep your eyes open for other opportunities if this one's not right for you. Don't get disheartened if this one doesn't fit you. There are other things out there, okay? So the NMSBDC network, 18 centers across the state. We cover the entire state. We provide direct one-on-one counseling to entrepreneurs starting, growing, buying a business, selling everything, of coverage. We also include the procurement technical assistance centers. These are, if you're looking to do business with the government, we can help you get registered to do that. The International Business Accelerator, if you're not involved in international trade, center specializes in that, and Technology Commercialization Accelerator, which is if you have intellectual property, things like that, we can assist you with getting that protected. All of our services are provided at no fee, and we do provide no to low cost training. Most of the training we do is free. If there is a charge, it's usually just like $10 to cover the price of the book that we provide to everyone, that kind of thing. So we are the state's only nationally accredited business assistance program. So by law, the SBDCs have to be accredited. We go through that process. And we'll talk about upcoming trainings a little bit later at the presentation. So let's jump right into this and get started. Okay, so eligibility, it's pretty narrow. So, let's just get to it. A live venue operator or promoter, theatrical producer, live performing arts organization operator, relevant museum operator, motion picture theater operator, and talent representative. Okay, so these are the ones that are listed in the Act. Let me say something. I'm going to give you the definition of relevant museum operator when we get to it. So if you're wondering what on earth that means, I'll explain the very specifics of that. Okay, so let's talk about the broad eligibility requirements. So this is going to be applying to all of the entities, because I'm going to get into the details. If you're a theater, there's specific requirements for that. If you're a museum, there's specific requirements for that. So I'm going to get into the details of each of the entities, but these apply to everyone. So the entity has to have been fully operational on February 29th, 2020. If your entity if you were not fully operational on February 29th, 2020, you're not eligible for this opportunity. So again, based on what's written in the Act. You have to be able to demonstrate not less than a 25% gross earned revenue loss in any one calendar quarter of 2020 compared with the same calendar quarter of 2019. So you're comparing a calendar quarter from 2020 to a calendar quarter in 2019. Now, we don't know how they'll interpret this. We know with the PPP, if they interpret it similar to that way, they allow the entrepreneur to basically choose which quarter they're comparing, okay? So it has to be the same quarter. So you have to take, like, let's say you're gonna do the second quarter, you'd have to take the second quarter of 2020 compared to the second quarter of 2019 as your comparison. But we don't know how they're gonna interpret it, but if they do the same thing as PPP, you might get to choose which quarter that comparison is coming from. So, and the business entity must be open or intending to reopen. So you either have to be open currently or you're intending to reopen. So those are the broad requirements that apply to all of the entities for this opportunity. So let's talk about specific eligibility requirements. We're going to start with motion picture theaters, okay? So this is a motion picture theater or motion picture theaters that are operated by the motion picture theater operator, okay? Has to be open or intends to reopen for the primary purpose of public exhibition of motion pictures, okay? So that you can't just, we had a local theater that was being real creative, and so they reopened to sell popcorn, and you could drive by them. Wouldn't apply here, okay? So you have to be open or intend to reopen for the primary purpose of the public exhibition of motion pictures. You have to have at least one auditorium that includes a motion picture screen and fixed audience seating, okay? So if you have a theater and you're pulling chairs in, that's not, again, within what's written in the Act. A projection booth or space containing not less than one motion picture projector. A paid ticket charge to attend exhibition of motion pictures. So it can't be free movies. It's got to be, they're paying to attend. And then the motion picture exhibitions are marketed through Showtime listings in printed or electronic publications or websites by mass mail or on social media. So it has to be those Showtimes are listed, they're printed in electronic format, etc. Okay, it does go into more detail within the Act, but in the interest of time, we're not going to go deeper than this. Okay. So let's talk about a relevant museum. A relevant museum, I'm going to give you the definition on the next slide, but a relevant museum or a relevant museum is operated by a relevant museum operator. It has to be opened or intends to reopen, serving as a relevant museum as its principal business activity. Okay, so it can't be you're a restaurant and you have a little museum on this. It's like the museum has to be your principal business activity. You have to have indoor exhibition spaces that are a component of the principal business activity and which have been subjected to pandemic-related occupancy restrictions. So in other words, because of the restrictions that you couldn't have people in there, had the impact. At least one auditorium, theater, or performance or lecture hall with fixed audience seating and regular programming. Now people will say, does it have to be a certain size? You know, I've seen some of our museums in the state and they'll have like a little area that shows a video, etc. I don't know. I'm just telling you what's in the act. So for clarification. Now, what is a relevant museum? It's a museum, the act that states it is defined in section 273 of 20 USC 9172.
Russell, can you advance the slide?
Yeah, let's do that. And shall not operate as a for-profit entity. So in the section that it refers to, it says it's going to be a nonprofit, so it can't operate as a for-profit entity. And in that statute, it says museum. So let me clarify what I'm saying. The Consolidated Appropriation Act defines a relevant museum under this other act that you see on the screen, section 273. And so we pulled 273 to list what's there. Okay, and so this is what's there under that definition that the act refers to. So it says a public, tribal, private, nonprofit agency or institution organized on a permanent basis for essential educational, cultural heritage, or aesthetic purposes that utilizes a professional staff, owns or utilizes tangible objects, cares for tangible objects, and exhibits the tangible object to the public on a regular basis. Such terms include museums that have tangible and digital collections, and it includes aquariums, arboretums, botanical gardens, art museums, children's museums, general museums, historic houses and sites, historic museums, nature centers, natural history and anthropology museums, planetariums, science and technology centers, specialized museums, and zoological parks. I apologize for reading the slide, but some of you may be on the phone, so just want to make sure those of you can't see the slide had that information, okay? Now, let's talk about the specific eligibility requirements for live venue operators, live venue promoters, theatrical producers, or live performing arts organization operators. So the characteristics of the venues where the events, artists, or entertainers are promoted, managed, or produced have this. They're a defined performance and audience space. So the characteristic would be a defined audience performance space, mixing equipment, public address system, and a lighting rig. Okay, so that is outlined in the act. It also, this one's a little bit it will depend on how they interpret it, but it's phrased engages one or more individuals to carry out not less than 2 of the following roles. And they have sound engineer, a booker, a promoter, a stage manager, security personnel, or a box office manager. Now, how they interpret this, we'll find out. Now, if they're going to interpret this, that means you have one person, maybe one employee or one individual that does both of these, like 2 of these things, or whether they're going to interpret it has to be 2 different people. We'll see however they work it out. In our interpretation, we kind of got the view that it was written in such a way that it was one person that could be doing 2 of the actions, but we'll see how they interpret it, okay? So the continuation for the section live venue is there's a paid ticket or cover charge to attend most performances, and the artists are paid fairly and do not play for free or solely for tips, except for fundraisers or similar charitable events. So again, like, you know, if you have a restaurant and someone goes around the restaurant playing at the table for tips, that's probably not going to qualify for this. So pretty specific. For a venue owned or operated by a nonprofit entity that produces free events, if it's free events, the events are produced and managed primarily by paid employees and not by volunteers. Okay, so if you produce free events, it's got to be that they're produced and managed by paid employees, not by volunteers. So if you do free events and everyone's volunteers that's producing them, the way this again is written seems to indicate you're probably not going to qualify. The performances again have to be marketed through listings and printed or electronic publications. So websites, mass email. So the performances have to be promoted and listed. All right. So let's talk about restrictions. There's some specific restrictions that apply. So you cannot be a majority owned or controlled by a publicly traded company. So if you're a publicly traded company, you're not going to be eligible. You must not have received more than 10% of your gross revenue from federal funding during 2019. That doesn't count the FEMA disaster assistance, okay? But during 2019, you can't have received more than 10% of your gross revenue from the federal funding. The business entity, you must not have more than 2 of the following characteristics. So you can have 1 of them, but again, you can't have all 3 of these, to be clear. So owning or operating venues, museums, or motion picture theaters or talent agencies in more than 1 country. The second one is owning or operating venue, museums, motion pictures, or talent agencies in more than 10 states, or employing more than 500 FTEs as of February 29th. Now, they define FTEs. FTEs are going to be 30 plus hours a week is a FT, for those of you, FT is a full-time equivalent, if that makes sense. So a full-time employee would be someone who's 30 hours or more a week. And if they're somewhere between 10 to 30 hours a week, that would be a half an FTE or a part-time 0.5 FTE equivalent, okay? And the business entity must not present live performance services goods of a prurient sexual nature, okay? So let's talk about other provisions. You're gonna have to certify that the uncertainty of current economic conditions makes necessary the grant to support the ongoing operations. And this is a really important one. We want to make sure everyone catches this because I saw a lot of questions on this, and it is correct. An entity is ineligible. You're not eligible for this SVOG grant if you receive a PPP loan on or after December 27th, 2020. So I'm thinking here. Yes. Okay. So the point here would be that you can't apply for that second round of the PPP funding and participate in this grant. You're going to be limited to one or the other. So just be aware of that. That is a stipulation. You need to plan for that. For the purposes of measuring revenue loss, the CARES Act funding, you're not going to count that as towards your revenue. And the SBA may use alternate methods to determine loss for seasonal employers. So if you're a seasonal venue, we have to wait on rules from the SBA to be able to tell you what that's going to say. And it basically says the administrator has some interpretation they can do for that. You want to use accrual counting when you're determining your revenue. And unlike the PPP, the program, the affiliation rules that don't apply here. And so no more than 5 affiliated entities may receive the SOS grant. Each affiliated entity, including any parent company, must meet all of the eligibility requirements. This is going to be reviewed. There was very specific language in there giving the SBA administrator oversight authority, as well as a requirement that was 45 days after the passage of this act, the SBA has to present a report how they're going to do the oversight and auditing of this. So just be prepared. They're going to watch this one. So they're going to be reviewed to determine fraud, non-compliance, or misrepresentation of how the funds are spent. Some of the things they did indicate, it said may, it used the word may, but for example, the SBA administrator may require the grant recipients to retain 4 years of employment records and 3 years of other records following receipt of the grant. So the SBA is going to be watching it. You're going to have to keep records demonstrating that you use the funds for what you said you were going to use them for, and that all the information was correct. But just be aware, it's something they are going to watch, and that was the way it was written seemed to indicate that the making sure this wasn't taken advantage of was pretty serious. Okay, so the initial grant, the amount for the grant, the amount equal to the lesser of 45% of the 2019 gross earned revenue, okay, or entities that begin operation after January 1st, 2019 will be eligible for the average monthly gross earned revenue for each full month during which the eligible person or entity was operating during 2019 multiplied by 6, okay? Or the maximum of the 10 million there. So That's the amount and how they do the calculations. Now, once we're going to talk about what it says supplemental grant, because they've got a process for the funds that they're sending out, and the supplemental grant is if money's left over. Okay, so if after they've got the initial grants dispersed and they've gone through that to dispense the rest of the money, they'll do a second grant that's equal to 50% of the initial grant amount could be awarded if you're still experiencing 70% earned revenue loss when comparing the first quarter of 2021, which we're in currently, with the first quarter of 2019. So if they go through it and you get the first, the first round of money still there, and you're still, impacted this quarter, then there may be the second grant may be equal to 50% of the initial grant amount. Again, just the opportunity is there. All right. And then the initial total of the initial and supplementals can't exceed 10 million. All right, so let's talk about how this money can be used. This is kind of important. I'm going to talk about this before, but in all of the programs out there, like the PPP, the EIDL, this grant, the money has restrictions on how you can use it, and you've got to use it for those specific purposes. So what's important for you to understand is you're going to have to think differently. And some people will let me look at the grant and see how I could use this money. And in some ways, you kind of need to look at your business and identify what you need money for, and then look at when you're analyzing the program. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But the PPP has different allowable uses of funds, and the EIDL has different allowable uses. But for this one, let's go through what this would look like. So this can include payroll, rent payments, mortgage payments, utilities, debt payments for debt incurred during ordinary business prior to February 15th, the course of business prior to February 15th. PPE, that's personal protective equipment. Independent contractor payments up to $100,000 a year. Maintenance expenses, administrative cost, the fees and licensing, state and local taxes and fees, operating leases that were in effect as of February 15th, 2020, insurance, worker protection expenditures, and advertising, production, transportation, and capital expenditures for live performances. Prohibited expenses include you can't buy real estate with this money, loan payments on loans that originated after February 15th, 2020, you can't use the money for that, to invest or relend funds, or political contributions. You can't donate money to political party, etc. from it. Okay. So let's talk about the important dates and when to apply. All right. Like I said before, the SBA has to write and implement the regulations to administer this program. We have no idea when that will occur, but the best indication we've got is that applications for the grant submittal probably are not going to. We're probably talking April, okay? Just from what we're seeing, that could be earlier. We just don't know. All right, but it's likely they won't be accepted until on or after April 1st, 2021. So here's the way they're going to break it up. And it's important you understand, because you need to figure out which bracket you fit into. For days 1 through 14, all right, for the first 14 days, the only awarded grants are going to be to entities whose total revenue for April 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2020 is not more than 10% of their 2019 gross revenues for the same period. So these are businesses that have shown a 90% loss, okay? So only people that are going to be awarded during the first 14 days are those that were just slammed, right? Then for days 15 through 28, the only award grants are going to be entities whose total revenue for April 1st, 2020 through December is not more than 30% of the 29 revenue gross for the same period. So that's a 70% loss of revenue, okay? So the first window opens, closes, the second window opens, closes. Then after that, on day 29 and on, any eligible entity that can be awarded the initial grant. And so if you're an eligible entity, you can be awarded the grant after those first 2 priority periods have been passed. And this is kind of important, because you're like, well, will there be any money left? Here's what we know. They can't. The rules was that they cannot spend more than 80% of the total allocation during that first 28 days. So the SBA is restricted that they're going to have to leave some money left over, but only 80% of it can be spent within that first 28-day period for those first two brackets and opening up. So we'll have to see. So if you don't fall into those two criterias, if they've already spent 80% by the time they get there, it's going to be really competitive. If not, we don't know, but we're just sharing what's written. And the other is 2 billion of the 15 billion program is reserved for entities with fewer than 50 FTEs. So they're setting aside 2 billion of that to make sure that the smaller entities with fewer than 50 FTEs have a shot at this. Okay. So for the website, NMSBDC, our website has lots of information on the programs that we have to offer, as well as the webinars. Adrian, I'm not sure if she's on the presentation where she can share. But what we will say is you can go to nmsbdc.org, and we have on there our trainings, and you can see other trainings. We have free trainings that cover this topic, the PPP and other subject matter. We have lots of recordings on there of the presentations that you can go on to get further information, and visit the website for more information. So let's talk about what you would do now. So you need to create a strategy based on a couple of options. So let's think through this. You need to start gathering your business financial information from 2019 and 2020 by quarter, okay? So if you remember the way this was written, no one's seen the application yet, so we don't really know what it's gonna look like, but the way it's written, you're gonna be comparing a 2019 quarter to a 2020 quarter, so you need to make sure you have your financial information for those 2 years by quarter, so you've got the data you need. You're going to need to determine what round you qualify based on those 3 time periods. So would you fit into that first 14-day period or the second 14-day period? So, look at your revenue loss and figure out, am I in that first slot, the second slot, or am I going to be in that after the 29th day slot? All right. You need to also the documents for the funds that you need compared against allowable use of funds. So what you need to do is you need to figure out what you need money for, okay? So there's 2 approaches here. People say, oh, there's money, I'm gonna go after it. It's not gonna work that way, because remember, what I think this application is likely to look at is all of the criteria, plus they're gonna ask you what you need the money for and how you're gonna use it. And so you need to really be thinking through for your entity, what you need funds for, and then you need to compare that against the allowable use of the funds to see, do they match, all right? The other approach you might take is determine which of the allowable uses of funds that you can take advantage of based on your analysis. So I'm talking about the EIDL and the PPP, SBA loans, etc. So what this means is you need to be looking at other programs, not just this. So whereas you can be a sole proprietor and get the PPP, right? So you don't have to be a big business. Little business can do it. The key here is you need to look at what you need funds for, and then look at the programs to see, okay, this one will work better for me here, etc. Okay. Then you probably also want to do an analysis to determine the amount that you're eligible for under each of the programs. So if you remember the formula for the SVOG, there's a formula there that you can use that will identify the maximum amount you'd be eligible for. The PPP has the same formula. PPP has a method you can identify how much of the PPP loan you'd be eligible for, and EIDL as well. So you just want to look at that to see which would be possibly the best option for your situation. Stay tuned for more information and guidance. We'll let you know more as soon as we know more. And then the network is we're here ready to assist. I will add this: we are working on a comprehensive effort with the Cultural Affairs, Tourism, and Economic Development Department to discuss about the opportunity of making sure that we have a good list of all of the eligible entities in the state. Because what we'd like to do is really, from a comprehensive manner, be able to do a couple things, and that is make sure that if we have your email addresses, we can get in touch with you. The second we see an application, we're contacting, reaching out to you saying, we've got an application, would you like to, meet to see, what you need, etc. The training, so that as soon as we have information, we're getting the word directly back to you on the trainings. The other thing would be data. I think it would be very valuable to the state to know how many of our venues applied. and how many of them got the grant and how many jobs were saved as a result. So we're working to put some of those pieces together, and we'll let you know more as we go. But again, it's really important to the state to be able to get a picture how many of our museums were able to take advantage of this, how many of our live venues were able to take advantage of this, and how many jobs could be saved, so we can kind of get a feel for what New Mexico needs, and especially letting our state legislators know from the state side. So when they go into maybe 2020, the next session, we can communicate to them as, hey, this is the need and for these particular entities. So the data is helpful. So with that, SBDC is already here ready to assist, and so I'm going to hand it back over to Michelle or Johanna, one of the two.
I think it's me. Thank you, Russell. I know there's a lot of questions in that chat box, but I want to give Jim Brunberg a chance to speak, and then we'll try to tackle those questions and see if we can consolidate them and give some answers. I know there's just as I've said before, a hunger, a desperateness for information in the field. So we'll try to get to as many of those questions as possible. Jim Brunberg is a composer and former touring musician who loves venues so much that he started a few of his own in Portland, Oregon, Revolution Hall and Mississippi Studios. When the pandemic hit, he founded the Independent Venue Coalition, which consists of over 100 venues in the state of Oregon. Shortly after that, he joined the also newly founded National Independent Venue Association, NIVA, where he's now volunteering to help get the word out to small venues that might benefit from this grant program, the Shuttered Venue Operations Grant program. Take it away, Jim. Are you there?
Jim, this is Joanna, and I just changed presenters, so you should be able to share your screen. And I did want to interrupt really quickly. I forgot to mention one thing. We have Buddy Abeta with the New Mexico Music Commission, and he's also the Arts and Humanities Liaison for U.S. Senator Ben Ray Lujan's office on. And I just want to recognize him, and thanks for his participation. And any other political representatives, if you're on, just let us know, and so we can recognize you and appreciate you. So, all right, Jim, you should be good. You can see your screen.
Yes, I think I got the microphone to turn green. Yes, especially those representatives who voted yes on including the SOS Act, first of all in the HEROES Act months and months ago, and then in this act that passed in December. So thank you. And Russell, I'm so happy that there was nothing in your presentation that threw me any curveballs. I'm happy that so far things are looking good. Thank you, SBA, for administering this program. It's going to be a really time-intensive program because it is a narrowly tailored relief program, and that involves a lot of scrutiny, and it involves Russell and his colleagues working extra hard to make sure that these funds go to the right entities, that is little guys who are completely shuttered or mostly shuttered and missing their livelihoods. This is about jobs, and it's about bringing commerce and community and culture back to your state. So I'm in Oregon, and some things will be a little bit different here. We'll be talking to our local SBDCs and our local and regional offices, but a lot of everything that I'm going to say today pertains to the act, and a lot of it Russell already covered. So I'm going to go pretty quickly, and then my little PowerPoint presentation is something that I've sent to the group here, and you can share it in any way that you want. It's a somewhat simplified version, and it's more yellow. Can you see my screen? I need somebody to verbally tell me they can see my screen.
Yes,
I've shared my screen.
Yep, we're good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, great. Okay, so as Russell mentioned, there's so much that we don't know. This is a quick 12-slide presentation of what we do know, and this is I'm going to focus on venues. He did a really great job of laying out the rules in general and about venues. Russell also talked about theaters and museums, which I'm not going to focus on today. Those rules were very accurately overviewed, what we know of them so far by Russell. So this is for you venues or potential venues. Who's running this thing? We're told that it's going to be the Office of Disaster Assistance. They're the subdivision of the SBA that did the EIDLs. And I would love it if Russell's audio could be left on also, so that he can jump in just in case there's an update, because we are hearing updates each day. We get little niblets of things. Are you with me? Okay, great. And what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to do any speculation, or I'm not going to comment on any of the rumors. There's been some disinformation that's been put out there. In the initial SBA webinar that many of you may have attended, because 30,000 people did, there was one big one, and I'll get to that later. But we are told that this is very likely, because it's a grant, that it's going to go through grants.gov, as the administering paperwork hub. Even though it's going to, the decision to be made by the SBA, they may use grants.gov. So when we get to the last slide, which is the things that you can do, just keep that in mind. I want to clarify, it's not being run by NIVA. That should be obvious, but we get a lot of questions from people saying things like, how are you going to decide who gets the money? Well, NIVA certainly is not going to decide that. We're just a trade organization that formed back in April of venues who are similarly situated. And then I'm going to just say this probably 5 times, but you cannot receive an SVO. And what we have heard now is that you can't receive an SVO if you even apply for the PPP. And if you've applied for the new round of PPPs, you check a box saying that you would not receive an SVO as part of your application. And what we are told that that means is not that you're not only going to not receive an SVO, but you're not going to apply for an SVO. So if you're one of those people who actually went through the application procedure for a PPP for this new round, but you are clearly a venue, if you think you're going to be eligible for the SVO, there will be some backtracking to do. We don't know exactly what that's going to involve. We have put the question to as many SBA people as we can. So don't panic. Just keep in mind, you cannot apply for both, according to the SBA folks that we've been talking to. Who's eligible? Russell covered this very well, so I'll just rifle through it. Live performance venue operators and promoters, for performing arts organizations, theatrical producers, talent representatives, motion picture theater operators, nonprofit museums. Broad eligibility requirements is that you must be fully operational by February 29th, 2020, and show that you've lost 25% of your gross earned revenue in any one quarter of 2020 compared to that same quarter in 2019. And you can't have thrown in the towel. If you've given up, declared bankruptcy, or announced officially that you're folding the entity, you're gonna have a hard time with this one. It's not available. These are some exclusions that are in the act that I think Russell didn't cover, so I'll spend a little more time on this slide. If you are part of a publicly traded corporation, you're not eligible. That is, if you're owned, 51% or more of your company is owned by a publicly traded company, you're not eligible. If you receive more than 10% of gross revenue from the federal government, you're not eligible. And that is going to be further defined in the rules, we are sure. But that's all we have on that so far. There have been a lot of questions about that from some nonprofits that are part of my membership here in Oregon. If you operate in more than one country under the same tax ID number or under the same identity, you won't be eligible. Again, there will be clarification in the rules about this. If you operate in more than 10 states, you won't be eligible. If you have more than 500 FTEs or full-time employee equivalents, you won't be eligible. And then, as Russell mentioned, if you're all about the sex stuff, you're out of there. Not sure why that is, but that is a focus of this as well. It's been pointed out. If you're a strip club or you focus on that, you're not. Yeah.
And that's standard for like all of the Small Business Administration programs and loans. That's standard language they put in all of them. And I think it's exactly that. It just, it's politically not something would be appropriate, I believe, perception.
Makes sense. So all of these must be a part of your world. If you're a venue, and keep in mind, this is not movie theaters, independent movie theaters, and this is not museums. And this is clearly not, if you're a talent representative, so this doesn't apply to you. But if you're a venue and you're applying, you need to have that defined performance and audience space. We don't know what evidence yet is going to be required to show this, but there will be some, we are told. You need to have the mixing equipment, public address system, and a lighting grid. You have to engage, and as Russell said, this could be one person doing 2 of these roles, or it may be that the SBA interprets this as 2 people doing 2 of these roles, and there are 6 positions that are described here: sound engineer, booker, promoter, stage manager, security personnel, or box office manager. You have to impose some sort of ticket or cover charge. It can't be just free performances that you do as a hobby. You have to pay your performers. This is about jobs. And they can't just be going around from table to table for tips, as Russell said. And then events need to be produced primarily by paid employees, not volunteers. It would be great to have an act that saved all the hobbyists as well, but this one is largely about jobs. And then you need to market publicly these performances through print or online media. There are two general scenarios in which you can be eligible. The first one is that your main business activity is to promote and organize, produce, manage, and host these live concerts, comedy shows, theatrical productions, or other events. And as already stated, you have to charge a cover. The performers are going to be paid on some standard basis of fairness, which usually is, and then they go ahead and they spell it out here, the percentage of sales or a written guarantee, a standard contract, or other mutually beneficial formal agreement. And then the big stickler for you, if you're trying to get into this SVO program, but you're kind of in the gray area, or if you're a restaurant, at least 70% of your entity's earned revenue has to be derived from these cover charges or ticket sales, production reimbursements, nonprofit educational initiatives, or the sale of concessions directly related to that live event. You can't just have a guy who comes in every Friday and plays guitar in the corner and call yourself a venue, in other words. This is our interpretation, of course. Number two way that you can be eligible for this is that you, as your principal business activity, make available for purchase at least 60 days ahead of time tickets to events as described in the Act. And again, the performers have to be paid fairly, which they define, as a written guarantee, a contract, percentage of sales, or other mutually beneficial formal agreement. The amount of this is fairly simple. The initial grant period, the initial grant is 45% of your 2019 gross earned revenue. It doesn't seem like this program was put together to make you whole. If you're a nonprofit and you're trying to get 45% of your gross revenue, that is all your donations and contributed income, the program seems to have been contemplated to replace ticketing income and other income that derives directly from ticketed events. There's a lot of specifics about partial year stuff. Russell covered the main thing that the Act says. We're waiting for interpretation from the SBA about what happened if you opened your venue in November of 2019, for example. How that will work will be detailed in the rules. And I'm not going to get too much into the amount of different interpretations that have been floated by different organizations around the country. Then there will be a supplemental grant period of funds remain, which will be about half of what your first grant was. You have to show that you're still experiencing 70% earned revenue loss. And the total of both grants can't be more than 10 million. When's this going to happen? The only thing we know is after rules are written. That makes sense. They can't run a program without rules. And then the supplement won't start until April. And we've heard that this could happen, that these rules will be out as soon as the first week of February. That's sneaking right up. That's next week. That's the most optimistic. But at the same time, having a little bit of time allows you to get your books together. Priority periods will apply. This next slide, I think, is about priority periods, which Russell described very well, but I just want to review them again because they've been the topic of a lot of questions. People are worried that there won't be enough money in this fund. I don't share that concern because this fund is so narrowly tailored to help specific segments of the industry that are most decimated by the pandemic. I think that it is a well-designed fund, and I'm optimistic that if there is no, if we can do what we can to minimize fraud and minimize abuse of this program, I think that there will be enough. So days 1 through 14, those entities that have experienced 90% loss of their gross revenue. Notice that this is not earned revenue, but again, gross revenue. Then there's that second period, days 15 through 28, entities who have lost 70% of their gross revenue. And please note, if you received CARES Act funding for this calculation of revenue loss, that CARES Act funding does not work against you. It doesn't count towards the gross. Day 29 and on, everybody's eligible. There is an 80% maximum of what can be given away, so there will still be money left no matter what after this. These first 2 phases of the program, the first 2 priority periods are not going to eat it all up. And if you're a little guy, $2 billion is being set aside and reserved for entities with fewer than 50 FTE. I'm going to mention a big mistake in the initial webinar. If you saw the initial webinar, you may have been told by the SBA, and you may have seen on their webpage, that they're going to limit the priority periods to companies that are and entities that are 50 employees or less. That has been remedied. That was a mistake. It was redundancy. It was not intended by the Act. The $2 billion set aside, which has very little to do with the priority period, is what is reserved for entities less than 50 employees, or 50 FTE, excuse me. The allowable expenses, I think, also did a really good job of covering this. I'm not going to go into it. It's pretty basic. It's about what you would expect. You will be required to sign a certification when you apply that says that you need this money. And again, I'm going to tell you, you're ineligible for an SOS grant if you receive a PPP loan after December 27th. I'm going to take that one step further and warn you that if you even apply for a PPP loan after December 27th, 2020, that is, if you apply for PPP2, if you apply for it, you may be disqualified. We are being told that that is likely to be one of the rules. So be very careful. When you do your PPP application, you will see that there is a box saying, I am not going to receive a PPP loan. A lot of people ask the question, well, can I apply for the PPP but then just not accept it? Well, at first we were told that that was frowned upon and that would be very disallowed by the SBA. But now we're being told that there's actually going to be some sort of mechanism that says that if you applied for a PPP, you will be not allowed to apply for an SVO. And here I am, I called it the SOS grant here, but I think you know what I'm talking about, the SVO grant, not the SOS grant. Same thing. Let's see here. The affiliation rules are going to be put out by the SBA. There is language in the Act saying that you can't have more than 5 affiliates, but we don't know exactly what that means yet. We're waiting for specific rules. There are people asking, can I apply as a DBA? I've got this corporation or I've got this nonprofit that is mostly underwater bowling. That's our specialty. But up on the surface of the ocean, we've got this great little venue where we put on bowling shows. It's our venue. Can you apply if that's only a small part of your business? Can you apply just as a DBA? We have yet to see. There will be a lot of review and auditing of these to determine that there will be a minimal of fraud and non-compliance and abuse. So if you apply for an SVO, be ready to keep all your receipts and show that you're doing the right thing and not just taking money and spending it on your new yacht or a new engine for your old yacht or anything like that. This is going to be a closely watched program. It's fairly small, it's fairly narrow. Here's what we think you can do to prepare, and this is where, Russell, you can jump in if there's anything else you think. Russell already mentioned your 2020 and 2019 financials. Your 2019 tax returns may be required, we don't know for sure. Since it may be run through grants.gov, we think it's likely, we've been told that it's likely you will need your DUNS number. And I've got a good sheet full of resources. You can do a quick lookup of your DUNS number if you don't have that handy. It's not part of your everyday life. You need to have an active SAMS account. And when you activate your SAMS account, make sure that you go through and get the CAGE code that is attached to your SAMS account. That may be utter Greek to you if you're a small venue owner. Don't let it keep you from applying for this. Our intent at NIVA is to make sure that no small businesses fall through the cracks, no small nonprofits, no small theaters or music venues or comedy clubs fall through the cracks of this. We have a sheet of resources that I will share that have helpful webinars and helpful slideshows to help walk you through getting your DUNS number, getting your SAMS account applied for. And then finally, this only takes a minute, register for an account at grants.gov, but you will need to have the SAMS and DUNS before you do that. And I want to remind you, all those SBDCs in your communities are incredible resources. They can help you understand what accrual accounting means. They can help you pull your books together. They can help you with all sorts of things. One thing they cannot help you with is to tell you what the rules are about this program today. So don't call Russell today in a panic saying, there's nothing out there that tells me how to apply for this, because there isn't anything yet. Just like everybody else, these SBDCs are here, they're here for you as a resource. And the ones that I've contacted have been incredibly helpful. They're a great community resource. But as of today, they don't have the rules yet either. So don't inundate them with calls just yet, unless you need help with some of the things that are listed on this slide. That is, what is accrual accounting and how do I pull my books together in that way? And the SBDC may direct you to other resources that the SBA oversees, such as the Small Business Administration Women's Business Centers. I believe there's at least one in every state, and the local SCORE offices. I used SCORE when I was first starting my business, because as was pointed out in my introduction, I was a touring musician. I didn't know diddly about running a business. And a really lovely old retired guy came in, became close friends with me. He passed on now because this was 20 years ago. He was an incredible resource that taught me how to set up my business and pull my paperwork together. And those SCORE offices, I cannot recommend them enough. I think that they're underutilized. I've never had an issue in getting in touch with them. They've been very responsive. That's the end of my slideshow. How do I get back to the regular screen?
Thank you
I've
very
used this
much.
interface before.
I know it's new to me too.
Am I locked? Can you take us back to panel, or do I have to release something?
I think Joanna's our expert, so she can probably do it. Thank you. While we're waiting for her to do that.
Joanna.
For Russell and Jim for that wealth of information, although based on the number of questions, there's still just so much people want to know. I know Johanna and I were going to sort of ping pong on trying to get some of the questions answered. I was going through the chat and the questions that we got in advance, and one of the questions that seems to be coming up a lot, besides some that I think you already answered, is I think people are a little confused if they are promoters or performing arts organizations that depend on an open venue to do their business but don't have a venue themselves, nonprofits, if those kinds of entities are eligible to apply for this.
They are. They are. They just have to show that their business has to do with tickets.
Yeah, and I would say in the Act, just to clarify, it's page 2124 through page 2153, and I encourage you to look at it and read it, because that's exactly what we're going off of. But in that, there's I believe it is page 2138 where it talks about talent representative, and so you can look there and read that. And again, if you don't have your own venue, to kind of see the details of that specific item.
Thank you. That seemed to be a pretty big recurring question that I saw. Also, there was questions about, I see one that is, are musicians considered independent contractors such that fees paid to them are within compliance of the grant, and things of that nature?
Are musicians, well, musicians, some are usually considered independent contractors. I've met very few situations where musicians are considered employees. Musicians are not eligible for the SVO unless they are operating a venue or a promotion company that is specifically, unless they're responsible for the selling of the tickets. I think this is for the entities that take the risks and have lost all their income. Musicians similarly have lost their income. And I wish that musicians were covered by this. That's the musician side of me. But this Act does not contemplate them as far as I can see.
That was our interpretation as well.
Excellent. Did someone else have Johanna, did you have something?
Oh, hey, I had a question that was somewhat related to that. This is from Krista, and she's asking about home-based rehearsal studios without fixed seating, lighting, etc. Are those eligible?
My probably, because I'm going to probably not. Jim, you agree with that?
I do agree with that.
I'd almost say definitely not, but because I'm trying to stick to a theme here, I'll say probably not.
Thank you. I had another, I had one in my head. Oh, I saw that Janice from New Mexico Arts, actually, who has, I think, since left probably to tune into the governor's state of the state, was asking about accrual versus cash. So I know the accounting needs to be accrual, and and New Mexico Arts supports a lot of small nonprofits. So that's where this question is coming from. A lot of small businesses and small nonprofits are cash. Are they going to need to redo their accounting to be able to apply for redo their books cash to be able to be eligible to apply?
When they're looking at, from what we can tell, when they're comparing quarters against quarters, they're going to be basing it off of accrual accounting. And if you're in that, that's a discussion you can have with your SBDC advisor. So that you can talk with them about, because it may be some discussion of, now this SBDC won't do it, but we can try to have a discussion. Maybe an accountant or a bookkeeper can help you decode that for what you need.
Excellent. Joanna, is there anything else that stuck out to you? There's just so many questions. It's very hard to try to consolidate them into a more general ask.
There are. I'm just going through a few of these and gonna throw out a few. I know folks probably want to see the governor's address. This is a question from Paul getting at, this is a performance group that performs in several venues and public spaces. Did they qualify? He is a theater producer without a specific venue.
Performers are not listed as one of the recipients of grants through this program. Now, if those performers are renting out the facilities and then placing tickets on sale and promoting the tickets and doing all of the risk activities that are identified in the Act, they would really be promoters. If they go around and they have a show and they sell all the tickets themselves and they pay the musicians or they pay the other performers in the group and they act like a promoter, then they may qualify. However, that may is a big word. And since the PPP is open now, I would caution people against this maybe thing a month from now or however long this is going to be. And I'm not giving any advice to anybody that they should apply for the PPP, but I think if you're in the gray area, every way that this is a very specific grant program. I have not ever seen legislation that is worded with this many specifics to try to protect and narrowly focus on just venues, museums, professional promoters. And so I would caution you against trying to squeeze in anything that seems like gray area. Just, I don't want you to lose out on other programs that are more available and more tailored to what you do.
I think that's great advice. And I think if maybe what I suspect, if it were me, might be happening is many organizations probably looked at the first PPP and were so utterly daunted by how complex it was that they're thinking this might be another option, but this is equally as complex as the PPP. So really, if the PPP, the second round PPP is more applicable, then you're right, that's probably a good place to start.
Yeah, we don't have the rules yet even. So it's only going to get more complicated once the rules are handed down.
Yeah, and that was actually one of the very common questions, as if you looked at the chat at all, was about trying to make a decision about that, because without the guidelines, people aren't sure. They don't know how to make the best decision because they don't have all the information. So they're sort of put in a position of making a decision with only half of the information. And so, and I think that is the reality. I don't think there's a way to know everything before one of them. You have to apply to one of them before you're going to know everything about the other. And that's just the way that it is.
What I can say, if you're in that issue, your federal representatives are there to assist you. That's why we have them. And if you do have situations like that, communicate with your federal representatives that you'd like. It would be helpful if the SBA could release the rules as soon as possible. But again, I'm just, it's important for them to be aware of that. And that's something you could do, if you're like want to communicate that. But again, we just have to wait. We don't know. We can't answer the question until we have the data.
Oh, and you just reminded me, Russell, of something we were talking about before we actually started the conversation today, and that was that when administrations change, things slow down a little bit. So that's part of the reason that the guidelines are delayed and we don't have them yet, is that we're in the middle of an administration change. And as anyone who works for state government knows, we have to deal with that at a state level, and just imagine that times 50 at the federal level. So that slows down things a little bit. So I know it's frustrating, but that's part of the reason. And I think you've both addressed this in your presentations, but I'm going to ask it again because it is one of the most common things I see being asked in here. People are asking about when there's a venue or performance aspect that is a part of their overall organization. And so the example that I can think of specifically that relates to that is within DCA. So the National Hispanic Cultural Center, for example, has a venue that is a very big part of what they do, although they're also a visual art museum, among other things. And as a state entity, they get funding from the state and all kinds of other things. And so organizations like that who are losing a substantial amount of earned revenue are kind of in a pickle, right? Because they're not going to really be eligible, because even though they're losing a bunch of earned revenue, that 90, I guess that may be at the third level, but that first and second round are going to be for folks losing 90 or 70% of their gross revenue, right?
And one of the things, we have gotten that question before, previously, on whether like a state operated entity would be eligible, et cetera. When we read it and interpreting it, I can't remember the page, maybe if Glenn's on here, he can send me the page number so you can look it up. What we did interpret it is, yes, there's a possibility that a state affiliated could do it with very specific criteria. And that means the way we interpreted it, how we read it, like if you had a venue that was state associated, you couldn't like count the person who promotes the city or whatever as a marketing person. It'd have to be very narrowly, like if you're paying a ticket booth person for your venue, the cost would have to be very narrowly defined within that lane. But we're not saying yes, they definitely qualify or not. We're just saying it is something to explore. So if it is a state-related entity within that lane, we did see the caveat that there was the possibility that might be possible, but it has to be. You can't lump in. We interpret you can't lump in employees for the city manager manages at part-time, so we're going to count his salary. I think that to be very narrowly defined within the outlined roles. I'll look for that page number before we end.
Thank you. Joanna, do you see anything else?
I don't. I think everyone has done a really great job at covering the questions. Do you all see any questions that we haven't addressed?
I can't really see the questions so well, but I just want to say that we definitely have way more questions than we have answers right now. And I would encourage people to not panic and take a look at your books and consider that there are other programs as well. Russell pointed out a few of them, but this is a very well publicized one because we did so much outreach. We venues did a lot of outreach when we were advocating for it in terms of getting our federal delegation active on pushing for it and things like that. So there's a lot of press out about this one, but I'm not saying, stay out. I'm saying if you feel like you're in the gray area, be cautious and be cautious about what you put out there in terms of applications, because one application may disqualify your other application. And I've had that happen with my businesses in the past, and that's a heartbreaking thing, because you think you're just putting stuff out there in the world, but you're really alleging, you're checking a box somewhere that says you do not wish to qualify for this other program, and that is an element of this. So be careful. Don't try to shoehorn your thing into too many areas. It makes more work for your local SBA guys, and they don't appreciate that. And then, but also remember your local SBA people are there to help you. They're an excellent resource. They really have.
Right.
I've never met Russell before, but I met maybe 30 or 40 of the other SBDC reps and local SBA people, and man, it's really comforting to just talk to them because you feel like you really get a little glimpse into how the organization works.
Right. And I'd like to mention a couple things just because, again, I think people, they'll look at something and then they'll move on. The idle has changed, okay? For the second round, the idle advance, if your business meets certain criteria and it's in a low income, designated low income area, remember how they had those advances and they were doing up to $10,000, $1,000 per employee? Well, now you're eligible for the full 10,000 as long as you meet the criteria listed within that, within the idle. So it might be time to go look at it again. The PPP criteria has changed for the second draw, so you may need to go look at that again. The other big thing, because I saw some questions about people who saying we were trying to build a building or we're trying to operate, get started. One of the biggest things right now, you need to look up the employee retention tax credit. People aren't paying attention to some of the things in this act. All that money that you pay to your employees with withholdings or Social Security, for 2020, you can get up to $5,000 per employee back to you. The IRS will cut you a check for what you withheld from your employee's check and sent to them, okay? For the first 2 quarters of 2021, you can get up to $7,000 per quarter, which equals a total of $14,000 per employee, and the IRS will advance that money to you. So you need to get, look at these other opportunities. The other one I was going to mention is the SBA loans. If you go out today and you get a brand new SBA loan, let's say you're going to open a venue, you're going to open a live venue today. You don't qualify for this, but you're going to open a live venue. If you get a new SBA loan, the SBA will pay the first 6 months of the payment and the interest, not deferrals. They will make the payment for you for the first 6 months of that. So if you go get a 2-year note, you're only going to wind up paying for 75% of that because the first 25% the SBA is paying for. So it's a great opportunity. Even what you're looking for is maybe this is a time to expand your live venue. Maybe this is a time to look at taking out a loan to buy the equipment that you need for that opportunity. So just be aware. I want to make sure everyone understands there's a lot out there, and I encourage you to don't just don't get so narrowly focused. Look at some of the other things that are out there that might apply to you.
Great, thank you so much. We're going to go ahead and wrap up. And I want to again thank our panelists, Jim and Russell, and the staff at SBDC. Thank you so much for the information. This is a great opportunity to come together and work together to get opportunities out there and provide some relief to our struggling venues out there. So Michelle, you want to close it out?
Yeah, I just wanted to say
Can
for
I say
those.
one more thing?
Oh, yes, please.
Sorry, one of the important things for anybody who's still watching who thinks that they may be a venue and may be eligible, the best way to get up-to-date information from our perspective over National Independent Venue Association, of course, is to join. It's free, and you can just go to nivasoc.org, NIVASSOC.org. We're not trying to rack up membership to fill our coffers. We're trying to get information out to make sure that the little guys know about this program. So join up. And we'll get the up-to-the-date information. Sorry, I just forgot to mention that. I would not be doing my job if I didn't.
And I did get a couple of questions. Maybe people joined late, but the decks will be available. The presentations, the recording of the webinar will be available. Someone did ask if someone could share a link as to where they can actually find the text of the act, as Russell recommended reading it. So if we can include that in what we send out, that would be great. And I'll speak for Russell and the crew at SBDC. I'm sure they would love to be inundated with your questions. So if you have, there's a lot of specific questions that we definitely did not answer today. It was impossible. There must be hundreds of questions. It's incredible. I'm sure that if you contact the SBDC, they'll be able to help you with some of those very specific questions that you have about your organization and eligibility.
And I want to all my entrepreneurs out there, hang in there. You're so important to the culture of this state, and we know you're facing impossible situations. And so just, word of encouragement, hang in there, do what you can. You're very important to our state and you're very valuable. And we're here to help you. The SBDC will help you any way we can. Feel free to reach out to us and we'll help walk through it. Even if for some of you, if it's nothing more than just having someone to talk to and vent your frustrations, we're there for you. We'll do whatever we can to help you navigate it. But please, you're so valuable to our state. Hang in there to the best of your ability.
And someone asked about the NIVA link again too, so maybe we can stick that in the email we send out as well.
Sure, sounds good.
Thank you, Joanna.
I'll send those to you, Joanna.
All right, sounds good, Jim. Thank you. Y'all take care. Bye.
Bye.